So thank you, everyone. On behalf of American Express and probably on behalf of my panelists, I want to thank you for joining this part of the discussion today. I know when you thought about TechTable and the restaurant and hospitality industry, I'm sure big data was probably one of the things that rose immediately to your mind as one of the more interesting areas. So we're excited about discussing this today. Before we start hitting our panel with questions, I will say that in my perspective at American Express and with other companies, big data can mean a lot of things to a lot of people. And I think what's been fascinating is as you look back over, say, the past 5 to 10 years, there were probably moments when we all wished data could do more for us. I think back to some of Danny's comments early on when he talked about writing in pencil some notes about certain guests coming in, and even then trying to use little pieces of data, little bits of knowledge that he had about his guests in order to make the customer experience a little bit better. And amazingly enough, the advances in IT, in the storage of data and the ability to process that data, it's moved so quickly and so remarkably now that big data could probably do more things than we could even think of. And so now it becomes more of a question of how do we manage big data and how do we apply it to the use cases that we think are going to be relevant and improve our guest experience. So with that as an opening, what I wanted to put to the panel as a starting point was, when did you start investing in big data? It's not to say that your organizations haven't been collecting data for a long time, but when was the big shift in terms of systems, in terms of people, when you really started investing? And Guy, I'll start with you.
Well, very simply, the turning point for us was when we started working with a company called Avero. I'm sure a lot of people here are familiar with Avero, but that was really the game changer for us because all of a sudden we were working with a company that was really helping us analyze our data. And we'd obviously started working with OpenTable before, but really in terms of what we were doing with financial data, it was 2011 we started working with them.
Okay, and Albert, about the same timeline for you at OTG?
Roughly about 4 years. I mean, we as a restaurant company had been around for 20 years, but we had been looking at technology and and price as well. This technology is really, really expensive. It costs a lot of money to implement, and there's no point in investing in it if you're not going to do something about it. So really in the last 4 years, I think it became accessible. It became, the talent pool was finally there. You didn't have to spend a lot of money to get great results.
Steve, how about Wynn?
We invested heavily when we opened in April 2005, and we continue to invest. It's going to sound like I'm plagiarizing Guy's answer, but Avero has been a very significant partner for us, OpenTable, GuestBridge. And when we look at technology, we always look at it from 3 different angles. How does it impact our guests? How does it impact our shareholders? And how does it impact our employees? So we really try to look at it from all angles when we look to bring new technology on board.
So when you start in 2005, and it sounds like you have an earlier start than some, were there specific questions that you were trying to answer at the time, or was it a more general, we need to invest in this, we don't know all of the use cases yet, we'll figure it out as we go, but we need to start somewhere?
I think what we wanted to do, because we had an opportunity at launch to capture all of the guest information right out of the bat. That was critical to us. And now down the road, we have 10 years of information in terms of tracking averages from guest time in the restaurant, all sorts of different data, and we can run those reports and see where the business is shifting. So it's been very helpful from that vantage point.
Gotcha. Albert, similar story in terms of investing with specific purpose, or?
I think the purpose for us is really to get actionable data. I think there's a big misunderstanding about what big data is about, and it is not another report, it's not a pie graph, it's not a line chart. It really is about what can I give you that enables you to be a better manager? What can I give you in terms of information that's truly actionable? And that, for us, really meant real-time data. We always found in our business, it's a bit of an archaeological dig to figure out what happened yesterday. And you look at all the reports that people generate to figure out, well, why did I have a bad day? Or why was yesterday such a really good day? And for us, the challenge was really, could we get to a 15-minute resolution and predict when bad things were going to happen, and also notify people and let them know that things were going to happen and act on it. So you have an opportunity to see whether or not the changes that you were making in real time were actually affecting the end result.
So can you give an example of that, just to build on that, when bad things are going to happen? What sort of events or what type of things you're trying to identify?
So, whether or not the kitchen is crashing. It happens in every single restaurant across America. A certain combination of events happen, and things get really, really busy. And either you didn't have enough goods prepped, you have the wrong talent in the kitchen, you have too many people in the kitchen. So if I can take all that information and make a prediction that, hey, if you don't staff up or you don't put a more senior person on the line, that your kitchen's going to fall behind, that's actionable data today that says, well, yeah, I can correct it before it becomes a problem, because it's a cascade effect inside of a restaurant, right? When that problem starts, you can't stop the bleed until people start leaving.
Gotcha. So let me, sorry, Steve.
That's a great example in terms of having that data over a long period of time, being able to forecast, looking at trends, looking at holidays, looking at different time periods, and understanding. It may not always be a predictor of the future, but it's very relevant information. You can look at the weather. You can look at so many different variables in terms of forecasting. Then you take your service standards and apply against the timing aspect of it, and it helps really with our scheduling dramatically.
Yeah. So in my view, the nice part about that is it's a real impact on the business, and it's either averting a situation or fixing a broken situation faster than it would otherwise be caught. So Guy, I can think about the application of big data from an expense standpoint. I can think about it from a revenue enhancement standpoint. But when I think about the Four Seasons, I think about the incredible customer experience that you offer. So I'd love for you to just give us a sense for how you bring data to life in terms of improving the guest experience.
So a couple of ways. We are a management company. We are running our hotels for our owners, and they're expecting a return. They're looking for improved profits in restaurants, and we're expecting our restaurant general managers and our food and beverage directors to be responding in an appropriate way. In the old days, there was data all over the place, and they were stuck in their offices. I think Danny referred to this earlier on. And it was taking them off the floor, and they weren't able to focus on the customer experience. So Vero came in and was able to really collect, sort, and present this information to us in a way that was enabled us to make decisions very, very quickly. Micros actually had the ability to do it, but it was very cumbersome, and we just weren't able to use that. I hope there's nobody from Micros who's going to shoot me here, by the way. We still use you, by the way, Micros.
Yeah.
So Avero had that great advantage. So customer experience was greatly improved because our people, our managers, were on the floor able to observe and train, and so that's one simple example. Another one is Avero have their proprietary system program that's called single server mentoring. I don't know whether everybody knows about it, but they really look at every server's performance by looking at every server's average check and how much they're generating. And we want every customer to have a similar experience. We're all about consistency, and we want to make sure that our guests are being given the opportunity at breakfast to select a juice, to select a variety of coffees, to select maybe at dinner time a dessert. Well, if the servers aren't selling those things, we're going to see that on their average check. So single server mentoring allows the manager to see which servers are generating the highest average check. Thumbs up. The ones that are doing the lowest average check, they're obviously not offering the same experience. They're obviously not driving average check as well, but it's not the same experience. So two very small examples of how we've been able to improve customer experience.
And some of the things that you talked about, talking about specific menu items, whether it's appetizers or entrees, or thinking about how wine is presented, how those options are presented to the guests. Steve, I remember in one of our conversations a couple of weeks ago, you talked very specifically about how the data that Wynn and Encore gather can inform what appears on the menu, and how the downstream impacts of what appears in the menu will influence other guest decisions over the course of their journey with you.
It was interesting. We were actually having a conversation in the room before this. I'm sure many of you have seen wine lists and cocktail lists on iPads, and it's been our experience that when we are in more contemporary restaurants where the user may have a greater affinity for using that type of device, they really enjoy it. when they go to a restaurant that I wouldn't say is necessarily fine dining, but attracts more of a older clientele, they're not as excited about using that technology. And so we really see a divergence in trying to figure out how do we meld the two of those. And the other thing that we find is, from a wine standpoint, a guest will walk in probably 80–90% of the time with a preconceived dollar amount that they want to spend, and they automatically go right to the iPad and they select that amount. And that's where the human interaction with the wine manager and the sommelier is really an area that's very interesting in terms of seeing how that outcome goes.
So you've got these massive quantities of data that you've talked about some of the use cases where you're bringing it to life, whether from addressing servers and how they could perform better and give a better customer experience, or how staff are spending more time on the floor improving that guest experience. In terms of the behind-the-scenes interaction, organizationally, where does this data sit within your companies? I'd love to understand, is it in a central team that then partners with all the different front of the house, back of the house, et cetera? Or is it integrated more fully into the different areas of the business? So Albert, I'll start with you on that one.
Yeah, so, and you know, my background is not restaurant operations. My background isn't hospitality. And so one of the first things that I had as a challenge was, well, I'm coming into a brand new industry. I don't really understand what and how people consume, what's a good step of service, what's a bad one. And so the goal was really to pair up with the operator. And so I spent 2 months sitting with restaurant managers, 2 months running restaurants, trying to understand. And you know, I think that was really the beginning of how we built out our program, was making sure that technology was not the centerpiece, right? Technology is here to empower people with information, enable them to make decisions. If it's too heavy-handed, if we're trying to rely too much on the technology alone, it's not going to work. At the end of the day, it's still a restaurant. We don't believe in full automation, but we do believe in handicapping people so that they can all perform at least, we'll call it the minimum level. So how do you get your morning manager on Sunday, who's not going to be firing on all cylinders, maybe had a little too much to drink the night before, coming in at 6 o'clock in the morning and performing as well as your GM on the closing shift on a Friday night? If you do the data exercise right, everyone should have access to the same decision analysis to make the same real-time decisions to run a restaurant well.
Yeah. Steve, I'll ask you the same question. Where does it sit within the organization, within Wynn Encore, and how do you partner across the organization to sort of drive impact and a return on the substantial investment that you're making in the data?
So within our organization, it sits within the IT department, and we have it in duplicated platforms. So if we ever go down, we have the immediate opportunity to pull up reservations. It's amazing. There's on Avero, as we're talking about, they have a mobile platform, which is incredible in terms of our managers being able to have live instant data to be able to look at. But we keep everything very secure. We have a lot of data that we keep from a duplicity standpoint. So again, if systems go down, we have immediate access to that. And I know at the opening, Danny had talked about somebody stealing the guest book out of that's an operator's obviously worst nightmare. And so having that redundancy is critical.
So Guy, within the Four Seasons, we've talked in a couple of these panels about the importance of the tech people understanding what the hospitality experience is like and should be like, and the hospitality people understanding what the tech side can do for them. To what degree, within Four Seasons, when you think about the data that you've gathered today, to what degree do you see almost the data side of things pushing ideas out to the hospitality side, or is it more hospitality side drawing in and pulling and saying, here are a set of problems I'd like to solve, or here's an element to the guest experience I'd like to improve? How does that interaction work?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, again, working with Avero is a good example. They have a lot of programs, and I think we have to be very, very careful to make sure that we filter it down to, which we have done, 4 or 5 really key ones that are going to impact revenue, profit, the guest experience, efficiency, so that each property is not doing their own thing and they're all over the place. So we've had to standardize that. But as an example of how we have gone to them, for example, and said, hey, help us with a problem. And we were saying it wasn't really a problem. We wanted to drive average check. So we created something which we titled Catch Me If You Can, which was an upselling competition that we did throughout all of our hotels. And we're very competitive, and I oversee all our hotels in the Americas. There's somebody that does the same for Europe, Middle East, another guy that sits in Singapore doing the same for APAC. So we were able, through our partners with Avero, to have an average check competition where we're able to compare, one window of time with the previous year. We had to be very careful in an organization like ours that has resorts that do ski, resorts that do beach, where different times of year are going to have different average checks. So we're able to do year over year and be able to very, very quickly track per server, per outlet, who is getting the best impact on driving average checks. So, we have prizes, we have trophies, and we do all sorts of fun things like that. But it was a very easy problem for them to solve because they were just able to pull the information globally, right across the organization.
And that is, you mentioned the responsibility for a little over 40 properties in the Americas that you're managing. So that is something, though, that you can see your partners in Europe and Asia can see as well, and that's something that you can run globally.
Yeah. I mean, we want to have the region that has the biggest increase. Last year, the Catch Me If You Can increased our average check throughout our hotels in the Americas by 5.7% in that 1 month. And that's some serious flow through.
Yeah. Similar global approach to data, and Steve, I'll go to you on this one. Is it the type of thing where you're looking to build something that can service all Wynn properties worldwide, or do you ever customize for certain markets or certain properties?
We try to do it across the board. And a further example to what Guy mentioned, ultimately at the end of the day, guests who make a reservation want to dine at the time they want to dine. It's great to be able to have the technology to say, well, the closest time you can dine to when you want is an hour or 2 hours from now. So again, with Avero, we're very focused on looking at when a check is closed, the time it's closed, until the time that the check is reopened. So we look at the busser team who's responsible for turning over that table, and we have metrics in place and a service standard in place in terms of how quickly that table can get turned over. And that comes back to the faster we can do that, it impacts our shareholders, obviously. It's good for employees that are tipped, because obviously they're getting more income coming through, and it's also good for the guest.
And it's very good for the guest experience as well, because typically during holidays, the table turn time is a little bit slower. People are hanging out a little bit more. So we can then adjust our reservations approach to say, well, we're not going to get people in an hour and a half. We're going to need to give them an hour and 45 or 2 hours. So that data is able to help us in a big way.
So it's interesting because you mentioned, you had a very specific number in terms of the increase in average check size that you were able to attribute not only to the competition, as it were, but to the fact that you had data to even have that competition in the first place. So it sounds as though, and Albert, I'd like to get your perspective on this one, is it the case that you feel as though the investments that you're making in data, which it may be less expensive to do some of these things than it was 5 or 10 years ago, but it's often still a substantial outlay. Is it the case that within OTG that you are required to demonstrate a return on that investment, and that you're required to almost tie back and identify the customer experience improvement or the revenue improvement that you generated as a result of that investment in analytics?
It's a risk management exercise. If I told you that I would guarantee every time that I do something, I'm going to increase revenue by 5%, or I'm going to decrease table turns by 5%, you'd tell me I'm crazy, right? But if I told you, well, these are the 20 things I'm going to try, and I think about half of them are going to stick, but from all of those experiments, I'm going to learn from it. From all those experiments, I'm going to find out, well, what do people actually respond to? What do our crew members respond to in terms of positive reinforcement? When do you need to call in a manager? When do you need to escalate an issue? I think those are the learnings as part of this whole big data exercise, where you're going to make a lot of guesses. And one of the things that's really interesting is, for all the technology that's out there, for all the data that's out there, if you think about the people on the floor, the best people that you have on the floor today running front of house, they are incredibly smart, and they are incredibly connected to what's going on. And they can walk into a room, look around, and they can go, I think this is going to happen. And our data right now shows they're right 95% of the time, and they can make these decisions. But how many times can you hire that one person? And so for us, it's really finding those experiments that say, well, can I take the junior person that's only been on a week and give them that information? Can I make him smarter? Can I make him that great manager?
So I think what's interesting about that, your point about experimentation, I mean, Steve, you spoke earlier about the need for companies to experiment, to recognize that things will fail sometimes, often in certain cases. And I think about the sort of conflict with, say, a Wynn or a Four Seasons and the very consistent, high-level guest experience that you're trying to provide. When you think about the use cases that you have for data and analytics, do your teams feel empowered to do some of that experimentation, to try things that may not yield a result initially or may not work in the way that you expect? And Guy, I'll start with you on that one.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, there was a day when our restaurants were operated by a bunch of Cornell grads that were a year and a half out of Cornell, a little wet behind the ears. I know there's a lot of Cornell people here, so I'm going to be in trouble with them. But they were wanting my job, or they wanted to be an F&B director, and they weren't running the business. They were just caretaking the restaurant for a while. So we've taken a much more sort of independent restaurant route and say, well, we want to have a general manager for that restaurant. We want that person to take risks and to make decisions. So here's the data. You can see what your average check, your customer, your table turns, and a million other pieces of data. Make decisions that are going to help run that restaurant. We give them a P&L for the restaurant. They know everything about their labor and everything else. So we want them to run that restaurant as though it's their own business. So absolutely, we push them to take risks.
Is it similar at Wynn and Encore, Steve?
It is, as long as they're operating within a preset parameters in terms of what we're looking to achieve. We look at any new program that we roll out as what is the definition of success at the outcome of it. Are we looking to drive profit, whatever it is? We really have a defined parameter going into it to make sure that when we look back, we can see where the successes were and where the failures were. I think in the past it was much more difficult to pinpoint where success was, but through Avero, I think there's something like 5,000 different reports that you can get. And it's astonishing. You know, Guy was mentioning about the single server mentoring, and I talked earlier about how we make it important for our guests, our shareholders, and the employees. We look at that sheet and we rank, or the system ranks from top to bottom, who the top service staff are. We take our lowest performers and actually have the top performers mentor them and see what they can do to help bring that check average up. Then we take a corollary report and we look at, well, those high performers, what is their tip percentage in comparison to everybody else? Because sometimes you can have great salespeople with a high guest check average, not necessarily tip that much. And you could then start looking into, you know, we've got some great salespeople out there. So we're really trying to find a balance to who has a high check average and who's earning a great gratuity at the end of the meal as well.
It's a really good point, actually, because if it comes down to saying to a server, you're leaving $2,000 a year on the table because you're not doing as good a job as Fred or Sally because they're doing a better job selling glasses of wine, et cetera, and to be able to have that data right away, even for a new server or even for a server that's been around for 10 or 15 years. It's all about...
It's compelling.
What can we do for your pocket?
Yeah. With the experimentation that you've talked about, and I'm sure over the months and years now that you've been doing this, you've tried some things that have probably worked fairly effectively for you, and you've probably tried some things that haven't worked out. Where do you find the organization learning more? Are the successes more interesting to you, or are the failures more interesting in terms of how you evolve the experience? Albert, I'll start there with you.
So it's always the failures. I mean, successes are only validations that you can pat yourself on the back. Yeah, I knew it. But failures are, you go out there and you try something that you've never tried before, and you fall on your face, and you go, you know what, that was a really bad idea. But from that comes inspiration, right? You know, our CEO always says to everyone, you can't be half pregnant on any of this. You can't decide that you're going to run tabletop technology in just one section and make it optional. If you're going to do it, you got to just do it all the way. Ubiquity is really important for us as well. You know, we never really wanted to try all of this technology. I think there was a lot of resistance from within the organization to put even an iPhone in a crew member's hands and have them access it. They think it cheapens the experience. But then you think about what that information does, and when we did it across multiple venues at the same time, and the result was really astonishing. You know, the amount of information and how they were able to react to it. And you can't just have one top performer. You really need to understand, well, is it always going to perform better than all the other ones. I think people choose ringers all the time. They want their experiment to succeed, so they're going to check a box and they're going to say, yeah, of course this restaurant's going to do well. Let's try it there because they've got more seasoned crew members. Well, just because you have more seasoned crew members, they're probably really, really smart people too, and they can figure out, well, this is really important to my boss. I'm going to make sure this succeeds. So I think we got to really, really push the envelope, take really, really big risks. And we've fallen a number of times. We've tried technology that wasn't welcome, and we checked a box for ourselves and we said, okay, that's too far.
Similar for you, Steve? Do you learn more from the failures? And I'd love to know, culturally, do you celebrate them? I mean, I think it's not easy to encourage people to take risks, and I think there's a lot we can learn. I think about my own career. I've certainly learned more from my own failures. And do you embrace that? Do people get excited about that?
I think what the technology has done has really allowed us to observe that failure in a much quicker fashion, because we have so much information surrounding whatever the topic is that we're looking at. And with the ability to analyze, instead of having to wait a month, 2 months, 3 months, we have almost instantaneous data. So the original idea may not necessarily work, but having the technology available will allow us in a much quicker fashion to alter it and to try something before it goes to a complete failure status.
Same at Four Seasons? Do you embrace the failure?
I don't know how you would define embrace the failure. We're not opening the champagne every time someone screws up. No. But I was fortunate to live in Japan for a couple of years, where everything is 11. I would play golf there, and if I hit a good shot, I was waiting for them all to say, "Oh, nice shot, Rigby-san." But they would usually celebrate the bad shots more than the good shots, because it's a leveler. You're as bad as everybody else then. And I thought, well, how could I apply that in my hotel? Well, at the end of the day, people want to actually feel the recognition, the reward for the great stuff. And I think the thing is, you just got to make sure you're not necessarily punishing and penalizing people for screwing up. So, yeah, I mean, we have an atmosphere where it's okay to make a mistake. You're not going to lose your job if you make a mistake. But if you make a mistake based on the data that we provide to you, on a repeated basis that's losing the hotel and the restaurant money, we're going to have a conversation about that.
That's good to know. One final question I have, and we'll see if we have a minute at the end for some audience questions. I'd love to understand where you think about the line between the data that you have and how you can use it to personalize the guest experience, and when do you cross that line, and when does it become too intrusive? Because I think about some of the experiences that I've had in terms of my travels, in terms of my dining experiences, and in many cases, some of the best service experiences are done almost invisibly. So where do you think, and how do you think about that balance? Go ahead, Steve.
I think that line is still not defined. What I've noticed over the last year or two is with the continued hacking that we see into systems, our guests are a little bit more hesitant in terms of providing that information. We have the ability through OpenTable and GuestBridge to track preferences in terms of their indoor, outdoor, smoking, allergies, birth dates, and whatnot. But there's also, you have to be careful of that creeper effect of knowing too much about the guest, and also providing that information to a server and almost them being preconditioned, well, that's what the guest is going to want again, and making sure that that line still allows for originality and creativity in terms of approaching the guest versus, well, this is what you had last time, we're going to assume that this is what you're going to have again.
Albert, your thoughts?
I think that line is really drawn by how you present the information. There are multiple different ways you can talk about how you know something about someone else, right? And I think that line is always moving as well. I think there's a high tolerance now for what people know about you. I think people accept that if you're going to apply for a job, someone's going to look at your LinkedIn profile. And I think people keep on tiptoeing around a generational gap. And the thing you got to really think about is, and I had this problem in publishing as well, is when you say to an editor, people that pick up your paper magazine are going to die. Do you want your customers to die with the brand? And I think it's the same in hospitality as well. there's very few restaurants where people don't pull out their phone. There's very few restaurants where people don't embrace some level of the technology, and I think it's part of a shift. It's, I think it's scary to a lot of us. We grew up around traditional table service. We can't imagine a world where you walk into a Linea and there's an iPad and there's all this other technology surrounding you, but who knows? It could happen.
Yeah. Guy?
I think Steve was right. We're obsessed in our business with collecting information about our guests, but we have to be a bit careful. Just because they drank Dom Perignon at one party doesn't mean to say we have to wheel the Dom Perignon out and have it waiting in a bucket for the next time they come into the
For
restaurant.
the failure, to celebrate the failure.
We could do that. Yeah, we would have sold out of it by then with all the failures we have. So, I think we have to be pretty clever about it. I think it's about, younger people, everybody really, it's all about customizing their own experience. We've just launched the Four Seasons mobile app. Quick ad, if you haven't downloaded it, take a look at it. It's brilliant. And it really allows you to customize the experience you're having in one of our hotels. Whether it's ordering room service from even before you arrive at the hotel so that it's ready in your room when it's there, or what you want in your guest room, et cetera, et cetera. It's all about customizing now for allowing the guest to do it rather than us assuming that, just because they had this wine on a previous occasion, they've got to have it on the next occasion. I mean, we're obviously going to record dietary requirements, so we're not going to make a mistake about someone who's got a peanut allergy, but I think it's getting that healthy balance, and I don't think that we've defined where the line is. It's finding that healthy balance between doing things for a guest so that they think that they've been recognized, which is golden. That's really what people are looking for, recognition at the end of the day, and at the same time allowing them to customize the experience for them.
Fair enough. I see in the back that we're at time, so I'll ask if we can do a couple of questions from the audience before we go. All right, so I'll turn it over to the audience. Any questions for our panelists?
Hello, how are you? So you're all part of highly impressive organizations where data is really like the lifeline of how you operate. What advice would you give to an entrepreneur, small mom and pop, in terms of setting up the infrastructure for big data? I mean, it seems that data comes after the fact as you're growing, but what would you say, each of you, to the entrepreneur in terms of setting up the infrastructure for data, for collection and all of that?
I think a lot of it's in the planning early on. I think the things that affected our organization the most was things were unstructured, and it was a combination of paper books, old receipts, old reports, and then as you got more and more mature, you had more and more structured data. I think you have the luxury starting out early on of saying, well, here's what I really, really want to know about my customer. Here's what I really want to know about my business. And a lot of organizations go through these greenfield exercises where they basically have to torch everything and say, I'm going to build a brand new data warehouse, and all my information is now going to live in here. And companies that transition to Avero, companies that transition to these other analytics packages are struggling because their data is only so good from one point in time, and it gets better. But if you really, really want to learn what you did 10 years ago, you want to make sure that you build it right. So I think the investment is really, you got to spend the time, plan it out a little bit. It's probably more painful for organizations to plan out what they don't know. But just leaving yourself a field for something about an allergy, and forecasting different types of allergies would be a cool exercise, because who knows, that may be the data driver that builds either a brand new business for you, or maybe tells you something or informs you something that you don't know already.
I would say invest in your two greatest expense areas, your payroll and on your food cost. And really, it's like going out and buying the best house you can afford. Go out and find the best system you can, so you can understand what's driving those numbers and what you can do to impact them at the end of the day.
There's a question in the front.
So you all are part of very large organizations, and when it comes to technology, there are so many customers and stakeholders and people inside and outside of these organizations to get on board. So for each of you, what contingency has been the biggest resistance to the tech that you're spearheading, and how have you overcome that?
For us, it's operations. It's the most traditional part of the house, and it is an industry that hasn't really changed in many, many years, and to a large degree still stays the same. And so when you tell them that something else may know something that you don't know, it's very threatening. I think that is probably the biggest resistance.
For us, it's infrastructure. Everything that operates within our property has to go past the Gaming Commission. So the industry's evolved so quickly that to try to get that process through has been a little bit concerning.
I think there's one thing that we've found that we've got to be a little bit careful about. We always ask our guests, as I'm sure you do in your organizations, if they want to receive marketing information. And we keep a lot of that information for our hotel guests. And if there are any preferences, any guest preferences, we're going to keep in what we call Opera. But then a restaurant general manager, and I was referencing earlier on that we're pushing them to be entrepreneurs and take risks. So they run off and open up a program like Fishbowl to start marketing their own restaurant. Well, a hotel guest might also use the hotel restaurant, we hope. And so then if the restaurant general manager starts sending marketing information to them when they've already declined receiving information from the hotel, then we have a problem. So it's, the challenge really is with operations trying to move forward with different technical programs is just making sure that everyone's in sync. And at the moment, these programs don't really talk together, so we have to find ways in which we can prevent that.
I think we may be at time, so I'd say on behalf of myself, on behalf of American Express and my fellow panelists, thank you so much, especially to the TechTable team. Real honor to participate today. Thank you.
Here, here.